The snow fell in curtains so thick that thermal scopes became useless beyond 50 meters. Captain Derek Holloway checked his watch. 2,147 hours, December 24th. Somewhere back in the States, families were gathering around lit trees, children tracking Santa on their tablets. Here, in the Karakesh Mountains, the only lights were sporadic muzzle flashes 3 clicks northeast and the occasional flare that painted the valley red before dying. Command, this is Vanguard 6. We're at Checkpoint Bravo. Visibility near zero. Proceeding to objective. Holloway's breath crystallized as he spoke into the radio. The response crackled through static. Roger. Vanguard 6. Intelligence confirms hostile forces still holding the supply depot. You have 4 hours before their reinforcements arrive. Extract the prisoner and destroy those weapon caches. No room for error. No room for error. On Christmas. Holloway almost laughed, but the cold had frozen his sense of humor somewhere back at the base. He turned to his 8-person team, all veterans of at least 2 deployments. They'd worked together for 18 months, knew each other's breathing patterns, could coordinate an ambush with hand signals alone. Then there was the 9th member. She stood at the rear of the formation, checking her rifle with methodical precision. Lieutenant Sarah Brennan, according to her papers. Attached to their unit 72 hours ago with minimal briefing, no combat decorations visible, no reputation preceding her, no explanation for why command would add someone to a critical mission at the last minute. Sergeant Marcus Webb, Holloway's second-in-command, had pulled him aside before departure. "Sir, what's her story? We've never operated with her. Christmas Eve op isn't the time for unknowns." Holloway had no good answer. Orders were orders. The paperwork said she was qualified. That had to be enough. Now, watching her adjust her pack with movements that suggested competence if not experience, Holloway approached. "Brennan, you stay mid-formation. Webb will be 2 positions ahead. Match his pace, follow his lead. This terrain is unforgiving." "Understood, sir." Her voice was quiet, almost swallowed by the wind. "And Brennan? This isn't a training exercise. People die when they hesitate." "Yes, sir." Nothing in her tone suggested fear or bravado, just acknowledgement. Holloway couldn't decide if that was reassuring or concerning. The team moved out in tactical spacing, a dark snake threading through white landscape. The temperature had dropped to -15. Exposed skin would get frostbite in minutes. Every breath was labor, every step a negotiation with ice-covered rock. 2 hours in, they reached an overwatch position. Below, barely visible through the snowfall, sat the enemy supply depot. 3 buildings clustered around a central courtyard, generator lights casting yellow patches on snow. Intel said 20 hostiles, maybe 25. The prisoner was reportedly in the eastern structure. Holloway glassed the compound through his scope. Guard rotations every 30 minutes, patterns predictable. The operation was feasible, but the margin for error had shrunk to nothing. One mistake, one compromised position, and they'd be caught in a kill box with no extraction possible until dawn. "Command wants us to hit this on Christmas," muttered Corporal Jake Harrison, the team's breacher. Someone up top has a sick sense of humor. "Can the chatter," Webb ordered, but his expression suggested agreement. Holloway noticed Brennan had moved slightly upslope, positioning herself where she had a fractionally better view of the compound. She wasn't using her scope, just observing with naked eyes, head tilted as if listening to something beyond the wind. Strange, but not alarming. Yet, the captain checked his watch again. They had 90 minutes to get into position before the assault window opened. 90 minutes of crawling through snow while the temperature dropped further, while fatigue accumulated, while the possibility of frostbite transformed from theoretical to inevitable. "Vanguard team, listen up." Holloway kept his voice low. "We proceed to phase line Delta. Harrison and Kowalski, you're on the western approach. Webb, take Chen and Ramirez to the north entry. I'll lead Brennan, Foster, and Liu to the eastern building. Suppressors only until we're compromised. Questions?" Silence. "Then let's move. And people? Let's make sure we're all drinking eggnog tomorrow morning." A few grim smiles. Then they descended toward the objective, 9 shadows against snow, carrying violence into a night that was supposed to celebrate peace. Brennan remained at the rear, silent and watchful. The descent took 40 minutes of painful, slow movement. Every footstep had to be placed with precision. Ice-covered rock could send someone tumbling down the slope, and even a suppressed gunshot echoing off the mountains might alert the guards below. Corporal Jake Harrison had point, with Webb immediately behind. Brennan was positioned in the middle of their subset, between Foster and Liu, two solid operators with 3 deployments each between them. Harrison moved fast, too fast for the conditions. He was known for it. Aggressive, confident, impatient with what he considered excessive caution. In urban operations, his speed was an asset. Here, on ice at midnight, it was liability waiting to actualize. Brennan adjusted her pace, maintaining spacing without rushing. When Harrison hit a particularly treacherous section and his footing slipped, sending small rocks cascading down, she simply stopped and waited for him to recover, rather than piling up behind him. Harrison noticed. When they paused at the next rally point, he turned back, eyes finding Brennan in the darkness. "You're dragging, Lieutenant. Thought you were supposed to be combat ready." "Maintaining proper spacing, Corporal." Her voice remained neutral. "Sure. Spacing." Harrison's tone dripped skepticism. He glanced at Foster. "Think she'll be able to keep up when things get hot? Or are we going to be babysitting?" Foster said nothing, which was answer enough. Webb intervened. "Harrison, focus on your sector." "Just saying, Sarge. We've got a 4-hour window, and she's moving like we're on a nature hike. This is a direct action op, not a stroll through." "Corporal," Webb's voice dropped to a tone that ended discussions. "I said, focus on your sector." Harrison held Brennan's gaze for another moment, then turned away. But the damage was seeded, the doubt, the questioning. In a tight unit, that erosion of confidence could be as dangerous as any bullet. They continued down. Brennan didn't alter her pace, didn't acknowledge the criticism, didn't defend herself. She simply moved with the same methodical care, scanning her environment, adjusting position when the terrain demanded it. Liu, positioned behind her, noticed something. When they crossed a particularly exposed section, Brennan moved differently than the others. Not slower, but with a kind of economy that suggested she was reading the terrain at a deeper level. She chose a path that took 3 extra steps, but avoided ice-slick rock that Foster, ahead of her, nearly slipped on. At the final rally point before the assault phase, Harrison checked his watch. 30 minutes behind optimal timeline. At this rate, we'll hit the window's edge. Holloway consulted his own chronometer. They were actually 15 minutes behind, well within acceptable parameters, but Harrison wasn't entirely wrong. Any further delays could compress their extraction margin dangerously. "We're fine," the captain said. "Everyone, final checks. Suppressors, comms, demo charges, we go loud only if compromised." As the team performed their ritual checks, Harrison shifted close enough to Brennan that his voice would carry to her, but not to Holloway. "Try to keep up once the shooting starts, Lieutenant. Be embarrassing if you're the reason this whole thing goes sideways." Brennan met his eyes. For a moment, something flickered there, something that Harrison couldn't quite identify. Not anger, not fear, something colder and more certain. Then she nodded once. "I'll do my job, Corporal. We'll see." Harrison turned away, his confidence absolute in his assessment. He'd served with dozens of operators, he knew who had the edge and who was filling a roster slot. Brennan struck him as someone who looked good on paper but would freeze when the chaos started. He'd seen it before. Some people just didn't have what it took. Webb came up beside Brennan after Harrison moved off. "Don't let him get in your head. He's good, but he's also an ass about it." "He's not in my head, Sergeant." "Good. Because when this kicks off, I need you functional." "I will be." Webb studied her face, looking for cracks, for doubt, for the micro-expressions that telegraphed how someone would perform under fire. He found nothing. Her expression was calm, almost blank, like she'd already calculated what was coming and filed it away as simply another variable to manage. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it made Webb uneasy. People who showed nothing either had ice in their veins or hadn't yet faced real fire. He suspected Brennan was the latter, and that worried him more than Harrison's aggression. They moved into final approach positions, spreading out to hit their designated entry points. The clock showed 0041 hours, December 25th. Christmas had arrived during their descent. Somewhere in the compound, a radio played music. A stolen moment of celebration for the enemy forces, unaware that violence was crawling toward them through the snow. Brennan settled into her position, 50 meters from the eastern building. She checked her rifle one final time, chamber, magazine, scope, everything in order. Then she went still, watching, waiting. Harrison, positioned to her left, shook his head slightly. Amateur hour, he thought. She had the stillness of someone who'd never learned to relax before action. Too rigid, too controlled. He'd learn her soon enough, when the world turned to fire and noise. The assault was set for 0100 hours, synchronized across all three elements. Holloway had choreographed it precisely. Simultaneous breaches, overwhelming speed, prisoner extracted within 8 minutes, weapon caches destroyed, exfiltration beginning by 0110. At 0055, Brennan's voice came across the team channel, barely above a whisper. Vanguard 6, this is Brennan. Recommend delay. Holloway froze. 5 minutes before go time, and she was calling an audible? Say again, Brennan? Guard rotation pattern changed. They just moved 2 additional personnel to the north entry. Chen and Ramirez's approach is compromised. Webb immediately keyed his mic. Chen, status? Still in position, Sarge. Haven't seen additional guards. Brennan's voice returned, still calm. They're inside the doorway. Moved there 90 seconds ago. If Webb's element tries the planned breach, they'll be engaged from concealment before they clear the threshold. Holloway scanned the compound through his scope. The north entry looked unchanged. No visible additional personnel. Brennan, I'm not seeing what you're seeing. Shadows, sir. Watch the window left of the door. Every 30 seconds, someone moves past it. That wasn't happening during the earlier observation. Holloway adjusted his scope, focused on the specific window, waited. 30 seconds later, a shadow shifted across it. Waited again, another shadow. She was right. The guard pattern had changed in the 5 minutes since they'd moved into assault positions. Webb, confirm you can adjust approach vector to avoid the compromise? Affirmative. We'll hit the northwest corner entry instead. Adds 2 minutes. Do it. All elements, we're now go for 0103. Acknowledge. The acknowledgements came back. Holloway studied the compound again, then keyed his mic to Brennan's direct channel. How did you catch that? I didn't stop watching, sir. It was a simple answer, but it suggested something Holloway hadn't considered. While the team had been running final equipment checks, performing the mental rituals that preceded violence, Brennan had maintained continuous observation. She'd caught a pattern shift that would have resulted in casualties. At 0103, the assault initiated. 3 simultaneous breaches, flashbangs, turning night into strobing day, suppressed weapons, coughing their lethal whispers into the chaos. Holloway's element hit the eastern building. Foster went through the door first, Liu covering, Holloway following, Brennan taking rear security. The interior was exactly as Intel had predicted. A converted storage space, makeshift cells, 1 prisoner secured in the back room, 2 guards inside, both neutralized within seconds. Clean, professional, exactly as rehearsed. Prisoner secured, Holloway reported. Element 1 withdrawing. Webb's voice came back tight. Element 2 encountering resistance. We've got more hostiles than Intel suggested. At least 8 in the main building. Element 3 status? That was Harrison's breacher team. We're pinned down at the western structure. Weapons caches are here, but we've got heavy fire from the courtyard. Can't reach the charges. The operation was fragmenting. Intel had been wrong about the numbers, and now the team was scattered across 3 buildings with hostile forces between them. Holloway made the tactical assessment in seconds. All elements, prepare to bound back to Overwatch position. We'll suppress from elevation and... Vanguard 6, this is Brennan. Request permission to reposition. Negative. Brennan. We're withdrawing, not advancing. Sir, I can provide suppression for Element 3. Harrison's team is exposed. If they try to bound back without cover, they'll take casualties. Holloway was about to refuse when Harrison's voice cut through, stressed. Vanguard 6, they're maneuvering to flank us. If we don't move in 30 seconds, we're cut off. The captain ran the calculations. His element could provide some covering fire, but not enough. Webb's team was engaged and couldn't break contact to help. Harrison needed immediate suppression or his 3-person element was going to get shredded. Brennan, where do you need to be? The southern ridge, elevation and angle to suppress the courtyard. That's 200 meters from your current position, upslope, in snow. Yes, sir. You have 3 minutes. Go. Brennan moved. Not the careful, measured pace she'd maintained during approach. This was different. She went up the slope like she'd memorized every foothold during descent. Her movements economical and certain. Liu watched her go. Shocked. Sir, is she? Maintain position, Holloway ordered, but he was watching too. Brennan reached the ridge in 2 minutes, dropped prone, and her voice came back steady. Vanguard 6, Brennan is in position. I have eyes on courtyard, stand by. Element 3, when I give the command, bound back by pairs, Brennan will provide suppression. Harrison's response was strained. Roger, standing by. Brennan, you are cleared hot. The first shot came 3 seconds later. Holloway didn't see the target, but he heard Harrison's stunned voice. Hostile down, courtyard sniper eliminated. Second shot, another hostile down, eastern guard post. Third shot, western machine gun position neutralized. The suppressed rifle made almost no sound at range, just the faint crack of bullets breaking the sound barrier. But the effects were immediate and devastating. Every shot eliminated a threat that had been pinning Harrison's element. Element 3 is moving, Harrison reported, and his team began their withdrawal. Brennan's fire continued, methodical, each shot placed exactly where it needed to be. She wasn't firing rapidly. Each shot came after a pause, after calculation, after certainty. Foster, watching from beside Holloway, whispered something that might have been a prayer or might have been simple disbelief. All elements, bound back to phase line Delta, Holloway ordered. Brennan, cover our withdrawal. Roger. The team executed the retrograde movement, and every time a hostile tried to pursue or establish a firing position, Brennan's shots eliminated the threat before it could develop. By the time they reached the rally point, the enemy had stopped pursuing. The cost of chasing into the dark against an invisible marksman was too high. Webb did a head count. Everyone present, 2 minor injuries, nothing that would prevent movement. The prisoner was secured. The mission was intact. And everyone was staring at Brennan, who had arrived last, her breathing barely elevated. Harrison started to speak, but no words came. The mockery from earlier hung in the air, suddenly transformed into something approaching shame. They should have extracted cleanly. The plan called for them to move northwest to a secondary exfiltration point where helicopters would extract them at dawn. 4 hours of movement through terrain they'd already scouted, well away from enemy reinforcement routes. At 0230, everything fell apart. The valley they were crossing erupted with automatic weapons fire from 3 directions simultaneously. Pre-positioned machine guns opened up from concealed fighting positions, tracers drawing red lines through falling snow. "Contact left!" Webb shouted, but his voice was nearly drowned by the volume of fire. The team scattered into whatever cover existed, rocks, depressions in the snow, anything that would stop bullets, but the ambush had been perfectly planned. The enemy had known their withdrawal route and had seeded it with interlocking fields of fire. Holloway pressed himself behind a boulder that was barely large enough, bullets chipping stone inches from his head. His radio was chaos. Multiple voices reporting contact, calling for medical support, trying to coordinate in an environment where coordination meant death. Vanguard 6 to command, we are in heavy contact. Multiple casualties. Request immediate air support. The response was distorted by static and distance. Vanguard 6, negative on-air support. Weather conditions. Cannot fly in current visibility. You are on your own until dawn. On their own. 4 hours until dawn, pinned down by a force that outnumbered them at least 3 to 1, with wounded who couldn't move and no possibility of extraction. Holloway tried to assess the tactical situation, but the fire was too intense. Every time he raised his head, bullets forced him back down. He could hear Webb trying to organize a defense on the left flank, Harrison cursing on the right, someone screaming in pain that cut through even the gunfire. The prisoner they'd rescued was huddled behind Holloway, cable-tied hands covering his head, useless but alive. We need to break contact. Webb's voice on the radio. If we stay here, they'll just fix our position and drop mortars. He was right, but breaking contact required movement, and movement in this situation meant casualties. Holloway tried to run the calculus, tried to find a solution that didn't end with most of his team dead in the snow. Element positions, report, he ordered. The responses came back fragmented. Chen was hit, leg wound, still combat capable. Ramirez was unconscious, took a round to the helmet that hadn't penetrated but had concussed him badly. Foster was pinned behind inadequate cover and taking direct fire. And Brennan wasn't responding. Brennan, report status. Silence. Anyone have eyes on Brennan? Liu's voice came back. Last saw her when we took contact. She went north. North. Away from the team. Either she'd panicked and broken discipline, or... Vanguard 6, this is Brennan. Her voice was calm, quieter than it should be given the chaos. I'm moving to elevated position. Need 3 minutes. Brennan, get back to the team. We need to consolidate, not scatter. Sir, if we consolidate, we die. They've got us in a kill box. I can break their fire positions, but I need elevation and angle. Holloway wanted to argue, wanted to order her back, wanted to maintain control of his fragmenting unit, but the reality was crushing down on him. They were losing. In 3 more minutes, someone was going to die. In 10 minutes, maybe everyone. How long do you need? 3 minutes to position, then I can work. Webb, can you hold 3 minutes? Negative, we need to move now, or Webb's transmission cut off as a burst of fire forced him to cover. Holloway made the decision. Brennan, you have 3 minutes. Everyone else, concentrate fire on the western position. We need to make them believe we're attempting to break that direction. It was a desperate gamble. Focus their limited ammunition on one sector to draw enemy attention, while hoping that Brennan could, what? Neutralize an ambush force by herself? It was insane. It was also the only option that wasn't guaranteed suicide. The team poured fire westward. Suppressors were abandoned. Noise discipline was irrelevant now. They needed volume, needed to create the impression of organized resistance. The enemy bought it, shifting additional fire toward the western flank. Foster, who'd been pinned, managed to pull back to better cover. Chen dragged Ramirez into a depression that provided overhead protection. Holloway counted seconds. 3 minutes felt eternal when measured in heartbeats and bullet impacts. At 0237, Brennan's voice returned. Vanguard 6, I'm in position. You have the net. Tell us what you need. Everyone cease fire in 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, cease fire. The team's guns went silent. For a moment, the only sound was enemy fire, still pouring into their positions, confident that they had achieved fire superiority. Then Brennan started shooting. The difference between a good shot and a legendary one isn't accuracy alone. Accuracy can be taught, can be drilled, can be achieved through sufficient practice and proper fundamentals. What separates the legendary from merely competent is the ability to make impossible shots under impossible conditions and have them appear routine. Brennan's first shot came from a position 300 meters upslope from the ambush site, firing downward through snow that reduced visibility to near zero. With wind gusting unpredictably across the valley, at night, with her own team pinned and dying below. The shot took an enemy machine gunner in the head, dropping him instantly. The gun went silent. Her second shot, 4 seconds later, eliminated the assistant gunner who was reaching for the weapon. Third shot. The squad leader, coordinating the ambush from a concealed position that no one else had even identified. The enemy fire didn't just diminish. It fractured. When the person directing the ambush dies, when the heavy weapons go silent, when death arrives invisible and unstoppable, even disciplined forces experience a moment of dissolution. That moment was all the team needed. Element positions. Bound back to the northwest on my command, Holloway ordered. Brennan will cover. Moving! Webb didn't question, didn't hesitate. He grabbed Ramirez, and Chen provided supporting fire as they withdrew by pairs. Brennan's shooting continued. Not rapid fire, not the panicked magazine dumps of someone overwhelmed. Each shot was deliberate, spaced, placed exactly where it would have maximum effect. Fourth shot, an enemy fighter attempting to reposition the machine gun. Fifth shot, a grenadier preparing to lob fragmentation grenades into the team's position. Sixth shot, another squad leader trying to restore order on the eastern flank. Holloway pulled the prisoner along, moving in bounds, using terrain that moments ago had been a death trap and was now a corridor of escape. Every time he prepared to move, Brennan's voice came through calm and certain. Moving now. Clear for 3 seconds. He'd move, and no fire would come. 3 seconds of safety purchased by a bullet placed precisely where it needed to be. Foster was next, half running, half sliding down an ice sheet. An enemy fighter rose to engage him, and Brennan's 7th shot arrived before the fighter could aim. Foster didn't even break stride. How is she making these shots? Liu's voice, transmitted accidentally, his disbelief overwhelming radio discipline. Harrison had the prisoner now, dragging him toward the rally point. The enemy was in full retreat, their ambush destroyed not by superior numbers or firepower, but by one person who was systematically dismantling their tactical coherence. 8th shot, 9th, 10th, when the team consolidated at the rally point, they did a count. Everyone alive. Chen's leg wound was manageable. Ramirez was coming back to consciousness. They had lost equipment, had expended ammunition they couldn't replace, had come within minutes of total destruction. But they were alive. Brennan arrived last, descending from her position with the same measured movement she'd used all night. Her rifle was slung, her expression unchanged. "Casualties?" she asked Holloway. "Minor. Thanks to you." She nodded once, accepting the information, then moved to check on Chen's leg wound without waiting for further acknowledgement. The team watched her in silence. Harrison especially, his earlier mockery now transformed into something he didn't have words for. Webb approached Holloway, keeping his voice low. "Sir, who the hell is she?" "I don't know." "That wasn't luck. That wasn't standard marksmanship. Those were... I've only seen shooting like that once before." "When?" Webb hesitated, as if saying it out loud would make it real. 5 years ago. Northern Syria. There was a sniper operating out of the mountains. Never confirmed identity, but the legend was they'd taken out over 200 high-value targets. Command called them Ghost. Then, they just disappeared. Presumed dead or retired. You think? I think we need to ask Command what they're not telling us about Lieutenant Sarah Brennan. But Command was 4 hours and 2 mountain ranges away, and right now, Holloway had more immediate concerns. They still needed to reach the extraction point, still needed to survive until dawn. He approached Brennan, who was wrapping Chen's leg with practiced efficiency. "Lieutenant, I need to know what we're working with. That shooting wasn't standard qualification level." She finished securing the bandage before looking up. "I'm qualified, sir." "That's not what I asked." "I know." They held eye contact. Holloway could pull rank, could demand answers, could make this a confrontation. But doing so now, with the team still in hostile territory, seemed counterproductive. "Can you get us to extraction?" he asked instead. "Yes, sir." "Then let's move." As they prepared to continue, Foster sidled up to Harrison. "Still think she's going to be a liability?" Harrison said nothing, but his jaw was tight. The mockery, the casual dismissal, the certainty that she'd be deadweight, all of it sat in his stomach like poison now. He'd called her amateur. He'd suggested she'd get people killed. Instead, she'd saved everyone. The team moved northwest, through pre-dawn darkness, and this time, no one questioned when Brennan took point. No one suggested she might slow them down. No one doubted. They followed her through the mountains, and if she noticed the changed atmosphere, she gave no indication. She simply led them towards safety with the same quiet competence she'd displayed since arrival. 3 hours until extraction. 3 hours to figure out who she really was. Dawn came gradually, turning the sky from black to gray to pale blue. The snow had stopped, leaving the mountains pristine and deceptively peaceful. From their position on the ridgeline, the team could see the extraction zone below, a flat area just large enough for 2 helicopters, marked with IR strobes that wouldn't be visible to anyone without night vision. They had 30 minutes until extraction, 30 minutes to hold position, maintain security, and try to process what had happened. Holloway gathered the team. Chen's leg was holding up, though he'd need proper medical attention soon. Ramirez was fully conscious now, embarrassed by his concussion but functional. The prisoner was secured and quiet, smart enough to recognize that his survival depended on their continued good graces. "We hold here until extraction," Holloway said. "Webb, take Harrison and Liu, establish security to the north. Foster, you and Chen watch our 6. Ramirez, you're with me on the radio." The team dispersed into defensive positions. Brennan started to move with Foster's element, but Holloway stopped her. "Brennan, a word." She turned back. waiting. I need to understand what happened back there. That ambush should have killed us. Instead, we took minor casualties and extracted successfully. That doesn't happen without exceptional capability. We got lucky, sir. No, we didn't. You made 10 shots in adverse conditions that each eliminated a specific threat. That's not luck. That's skill at a level I've only read about in after-action reports. Brennan said nothing. Webb thinks you might be someone we've heard of. A sniper who operated in Syria 5 years ago. Very specific methodology. Very specific results. They called them Ghost. Something flickered across Brennan's face. Not confirmation, not denial, just acknowledgement that the question had been asked. If you are that person, Holloway continued carefully, then I need to know why you're here. Now, attached to my team on a mission you should have been briefed on weeks ago. Because Ghost was listed as Kia 3 years ago in a classified operation that no one will discuss. I can't speak to classified operations, sir. Can't or won't. Before Brennan could answer, Webb's voice cut through the radio. Urgent. Vanguard 6, we've got movement to the north. Multiple personnel, moving fast. Looks like they're trying to cut off the extraction zone. Holloway was instantly tactical. How many? At least 15, maybe 20. They'll reach the LZ before the helicopters if they maintain current speed. The captain ran calculations. The helicopters were already inbound, couldn't be recalled now. If hostiles reached the landing zone first, the extraction would turn into a firefight with helicopters exposed on the ground. Unacceptable. All elements, converge on my position. We need to. Sir. Brennan's voice cut through. Let me handle this. Brennan, that's a squad-sized element. We need coordinated fire, not a single shooter. If you consolidate the team, you'll expose everyone to direct fire. They have the high ground on approach. You'll take casualties before you can establish effective suppression. She was right, and Holloway knew it. Moving the team into position to engage would be costly. What are you proposing? I can interdict their advance from here. I have angle and elevation. If I can slow them enough, the helicopters can land and we can extract before they close distance. Slow down 15 combatants by yourself. Yes, sir. It was insane. One person, even an exceptional shooter, couldn't hold off a squad. The ammunition alone, she'd be firing constantly. And her suppressed rifle had what, 30 rounds? She'd be dry before she neutralized half of them. But the alternative was exposing his entire team to a fight they couldn't win in the time they had. Do it. We'll be ready to provide support if you need it. Brennan moved to a position that provided clear observation of the northern approach. She settled prone, adjusting her scope, controlling her breathing. The rest of the team watched, some with skepticism, others with something approaching hope. Through his binoculars, Holloway could see the enemy force. They were moving with tactical discipline, using terrain well, clearly experienced. They'd recognized that the extraction zone was vulnerable and were racing to exploit it. Brennan's first shot took the point man in the chest. He dropped instantly. The second shot came before the squad had even processed the first death. The second man fell. The enemy scattered, taking cover, trying to identify the threat. They were disciplined enough not to panic, well-trained enough to know they needed to locate the shooter before they could respond effectively. Brennan's third shot found a squad leader attempting to coordinate from behind a rock outcropping. The fourth took out a radio operator. The fifth eliminated someone trying to establish a heavy weapons position. Webb was counting. 5 shots, 5 targets down. She's not missing. Harrison watched through his scope, his professional assessment warring with disbelief. Her shot placement, she's hitting center mass on moving targets at 400 meters in variable wind. That's impossible, Lou finished. That's impossible. Apparently not, Foster said quietly. The enemy advance had stalled. They were pinned down, unable to move forward without exposing themselves to fire they couldn't counter. Brennan continued shooting, not rapidly, but with mechanical consistency. Each shot eliminated a threat or forced someone back into cover. At 12 shots, Holloway heard the helicopters approaching. The rhythmic thump of rotors cutting through mountain air, getting closer. At 15 shots, the helicopters were on final approach. At 18 shots, the lead helicopter touched down, rotors still spinning, crew chief waving them forward. All elements, move to extraction. Holloway ordered. The team bounded down to the landing zone, covering each other, dragging their wounded, pushing the prisoner ahead of them. The helicopters were loud, vulnerable, perfect targets if the enemy could bring weapons to bear. But they couldn't, because Brennan was still firing, still denying them any opportunity to engage. Holloway was last to board, and he turned back to see Brennan finally breaking position, moving down the slope in a controlled sprint, her rifle slung but ready. She reached the helicopter as the enemy finally got organized enough to return fire. Bullets zipped through the air, striking the helicopter's armored hull but not penetrating. Brennan dove through the door, and the pilot didn't wait. The helicopter lifted, banking hard, putting distance and altitude between them and the threat. Inside, the team was silent except for breathing and the rotor noise. Everyone was looking at Brennan, who was calmly checking her rifle, replacing the magazine, conducting a functions check as if she'd just completed routine training. Harrison finally found words. "How many rounds did you fire?" 23. "How many targets did you hit?" 23. The silence that followed wasn't skepticism. It was recognition. Webb had been right. Everyone who'd served long enough had heard the stories. The legend of Ghost, the sniper who'd operated behind enemy lines for 2 years and had never missed, never been identified, never been caught. Until they had been caught, allegedly killed in an operation that command refused to discuss. Foster spoke carefully. "Ma'am, is your name actually Sarah Brennan?" She looked at him, and for the first time, something in her expression shifted. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. "For the purposes of this mission, yes, that's who I am." "And for other purposes?" Webb asked. "For other purposes, I'm someone who doesn't exist anymore." The helicopter banked again, heading back toward base, toward safety, toward Christmas morning that was now fully arrived. Holloway leaned back against the bulkhead, exhausted, processing. Command had attached her to his team without explanation. They'd known who she was, what she was capable of. They'd placed her in position deliberately, a contingency plan for if everything went wrong, which it had. "Why come back?" he asked Brennan directly. "If you were out, if you were done, why accept this mission?" She was quiet for a long moment, watching the mountains pass below. When she answered, her voice was barely audible over the rotors. "Because 20 years ago, someone saved my life on a mission that should have killed me. They saved me when they didn't have to. When it would have been easier to leave me behind. I've spent every year since trying to pay that forward. This mission. Your team. That's who I am now. Someone who makes sure other people get home." Harrison looked at her, really looked at her, seeing past his earlier dismissal. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what I said before, for doubting you. You didn't know. That was the point." "Still," she nodded, accepting the apology without dwelling on it. The helicopter crossed into friendly airspace, and Holloway finally allowed himself to believe they were going to make it. His team, his people, all alive because someone legendary had decided they were worth saving. Outside, the sun was fully up now. Christmas morning bright and cold over the mountains. They were going home. The debriefing started 4 hours after they landed. The team had been checked by medics, given hot food and coffee, allowed to shower and change into clean uniforms. Chen's leg wound was stitched and bandaged 16 sutures, but nothing that would cause permanent damage. Ramirez's concussion was evaluated as mild, no lasting effects expected. The prisoner was transferred to intelligence services, who seemed very pleased to have him. Apparently, he had information about weapon shipments that could prevent future operations. The mission, by official metrics, was a complete success. Holloway sat across from Colonel Patricia Morrison, his commanding officer, who had flown in specifically for this debriefing. Behind her stood someone Holloway didn't recognize, a civilian in an expensive suit who'd introduced himself as Mr. Carter from Oversight. "Your report states that Lieutenant Brennan engaged and eliminated approximately 30 enemy combatants over the course of the operation," Morrison said, her tone carefully neutral. "That's my estimate, ma'am. Could be more. I stopped counting after the extraction." "And you confirm that her shooting was exceptional to the point of being outside normal operational parameters." "Ma'am, with respect, exceptional doesn't begin to cover it. I've worked with scout snipers, with special forces, with every tier of operator we've got. I have never witnessed marksmanship at that level. Never. Morrison exchanged a glance with Carter, who made a note on his tablet. Captain, what I'm about to tell you is classified above your current clearance. However, given the circumstances, you and your team need to understand the context. Holloway leaned forward. Lieutenant Sarah Brennan is a cover identity. The person you knew as Brennan is actually someone who hasn't existed on any official roster for 3 years. They were declared killed in action after an operation went severely wrong. That declaration was premature. Ghost, Holloway said. Morrison's expression confirmed it. That was the operational call sign, yes. And before you ask, no, I cannot tell you their real name. Even I don't have that information. What I can tell you is that this person has conducted operations at a level that very few humans are capable of achieving. They have saved literally hundreds of lives, usually by ending threats before those threats could materialize. So why attach them to a routine hostage extraction? Carter answered this time. Because our intelligence suggested the mission wouldn't be routine, we had indications that the enemy force was larger than initially reported, that they'd been tipped off about our operation, and that your team was walking into a trap. We couldn't cancel the mission. The prisoner's intelligence was time sensitive, but we also couldn't send you in without some form of contingency. So, you sent a legend as insurance. We sent someone who could ensure mission success regardless of what went wrong, Morrison corrected, and it appears our concerns were justified. You encountered how many unexpected hostiles? At least 40, ma'am. Intel said 25. And your team suffered what casualties? Minor injuries. Nothing serious. Morrison nodded slowly. Captain, had we sent your team in without that additional asset, how many of your people do you think would have made it home? Holloway didn't want to answer, but honesty required it. Half, ma'am. Maybe. The ambush was professionally executed. Without suppression from elevation, we'd have been destroyed. Which is exactly why we made the decision we did. However, that decision comes with complications. Carter took over. Captain, the person you knew as Brennan has significant enemies. Not just enemy combatants, but elements within various government agencies who have complicated feelings about their previous operations. If their survival becomes public knowledge, those elements will act. We cannot protect them if their presence becomes widely known. You're asking us to lie in our reports. We're asking you to omit certain details, Morrison said. Your official report will state that Lieutenant Brennan provided exceptional support during the operation. It will not speculate on their true identity. It will not reference any legends or classified operations. It will treat them as a skilled operator who performed admirably. And my team? Your team will receive the same briefing. They will understand that discussing certain aspects of this mission could endanger someone who saved their lives. In my experience, soldiers are very good at keeping secrets, when those secrets protect their own. Holloway considered. It violated several principles he held dear: transparency, accurate reporting, truth. But it honored a more important principle: loyalty to the people who'd bled alongside him. Understood, ma'am. My team will comply. Good. There's one more thing. Morrison pulled a folder from her briefcase, slid it across the table. Inside were official forms, personnel transfers, assignment orders. The person you knew as Brennan is returning to retirement. This mission was a one-time emergency activation. They'll be disappearing again, permanently this time. However, before they do, they asked me to deliver something to you and your team. She pulled out a smaller envelope, unmarked. Holloway opened it. Inside was a simple note, handwritten. Thank you for letting me be part of your team, even briefly. You're all exceptional operators and better people. Remember that the person who saved you doesn't exist, but the gratitude you feel is real. Hold on to that. And when you get the chance, save someone else who needs it. That's how this works. S. Holloway read it twice, then carefully folded it and put it in his pocket. When did she leave? 3 hours ago. You'll never see her again. Does she have somewhere to go? People who care about her? Morrison's expression softened slightly. I hope so, Captain. I really hope so. The meeting concluded. Holloway walked back to where his team was gathered in the ready room, drinking coffee, processing the mission in the way soldiers do with dark humor and carefully managed emotion. They looked up when he entered. Webb was the first to speak. "Sir, are we going to talk about what actually happened out there?" "No," Holloway said. "We're not. What we're going to do is remember that we had exceptional support from a qualified operator who is now rotating to a different assignment. What we're going to do is write accurate reports that omit speculation. What we're going to do is be grateful that everyone came home." Harrison stood. "Sir, with respect, we all know what we saw. We all know who she really was. Do we? Because I'm not sure we know anything except that someone very skilled helped us complete a mission. Everything else is speculation and rumor gets people killed." The team was silent for a moment, processing. Then Foster asked the question they were all thinking. "Is she safe? Wherever she is now?" "I hope so," Holloway said, echoing Morrison's words. "But that's not our concern anymore. Our concern is taking care of each other, honoring what we learned, and being ready for the next mission." Webb raised his coffee cup. "To exceptional support." The others followed suit. To exceptional support. They drank, and the subject was closed. Not forgotten, it would never be forgotten, but closed. Sealed away in that category of experiences that soldiers carried privately, that shaped them without requiring public acknowledgement. Outside, snow had started falling again, gentle this time. Christmas morning, continuing its quiet progression toward afternoon, toward evening, toward the next day, and the next mission. Somewhere, a legend was disappearing back into civilian life, carrying scars and memories, and a continued commitment to save people who needed saving. The team didn't need to know where. They just needed to remember what she'd taught them, that sometimes the most powerful people are the ones no one sees coming. And that gratitude, even for someone who doesn't exist, is always real. The base chapel was nearly empty. Most personnel were either on duty or gathered in the dining facility where the cooks had prepared a belated Christmas dinner. But Holloway needed somewhere quiet, somewhere to process what had happened before the adrenaline fully wore off and the reality set in. He sat in the back pew, not particularly religious, but finding comfort in the silence. Someone had set up a small Christmas tree near the altar, decorated with homemade ornaments that the junior enlisted had crafted from whatever materials they could scavenge. The door opened quietly. Webb entered, spotted Holloway, and moved to sit beside him. "Knew I'd find you here," Webb said. "Needed to think. About the mission? About what happens next. About how we got that lucky." Webb was quiet for a moment, then said, "It wasn't luck, sir. It was someone deciding we were worth saving. That's not luck, that's grace." "You believe in that? Grace? After tonight? Yeah, I think I do." They sat in comfortable silence. Outside, they could hear the muted sounds of the base. Vehicles moving, people talking, the ordinary rhythms of military life continuing despite the extraordinary events of the past 24 hours. "The team is handling it well," Webb said eventually. "Harrison especially. I think he needed the perspective. Needed to understand that his confidence wasn't the same as competence. And Brennan, or whoever she was, taught him that. She taught all of us. Showed us what true capability looks like. Showed us that the most dangerous people are often the quietest ones." Holloway pulled out the note Morrison had given him. Read it again. "When you get the chance, save someone else who needs it. That's how this works." "She's right, you know," he said. "About how this works. About paying it forward." "Yeah, she is?" The chapel door opened again. And this time the entire team filed in. Chen was limping but mobile. Ramirez was clear-headed. Harrison looked humbled in a way that suggested growth rather than shame. Foster was carrying something, a small wooden box, roughly made but carefully constructed. "Sir," Foster said, "we wanted to do something, to remember." He opened the box. Inside were dog tags, not official ones but handmade replicas that the team had created in the metal workshop. They read simply, "Coast, Christmas Eve, saved all." "We know we can't talk about what happened," Liu said. "We know the official story doesn't include the truth. But we wanted something for ourselves, something to remember that we witnessed something extraordinary." Holloway took the dog tags, felt their weight. They were crude, imperfect, but they carried the weight of gratitude and recognition. "She'd appreciate this," he said. But she'd also tell you that she was just doing her job. No, sir, Harrison said, and his voice was firm. She was doing more than her job. She was honoring a promise. And that deserves to be remembered, even if it's only between us. Holloway placed the dog tags back in the box, closed it carefully. Then we remember, privately, respectfully, and we honor it by being the kind of operators who deserve that level of support. Amen, Webb said, and somehow it felt appropriate despite none of them being particularly religious. The team filed out together, headed toward the dining facility where Christmas dinner was waiting. They walked as a unit, slightly closer than normal formation, bound by an experience that had changed them in ways they were only beginning to understand. In the radio room, a message was being transmitted to somewhere distant. Coast status confirmed. Mission success. Returning to inactive status. Package delivered. The response came back encrypted, brief, acknowledged, Merry Christmas. And somewhere far from the base, in a location that would never be documented, a person was removing a uniform for the last time, packing away weapons that had saved hundreds of lives, preparing to disappear into a civilian identity that would never face questions or recognition. They sat by a window, watching snow fall on an ordinary street in an ordinary town. A cup of tea steamed in their hands, a cat rubbed against their leg, purring. On the table beside them was a photograph, old and creased, a young soldier being pulled from a crashed vehicle by someone whose face was obscured by smoke and shadow. Underneath, a note in faded ink, "Pay it forward." They'd been paying it forward for 20 years. Tonight, finally, they felt like the debt might be settled. The cat jumped into their lap. They stroked its fur, feeling the tension drain from muscles that had been combat-ready for so long they'd forgotten what relaxation felt like. Outside, somewhere in the distance, church bells were ringing. Christmas continuing its gentle progress through the world, indifferent to violence and sacrifice and the small acts of heroism that no one would ever read about. They smiled, just slightly. Then they carried their tea to the fireplace, sat in a comfortable chair, and let themselves rest. The legend was retired. The person remained. And that, finally, was enough. Colonel Morrison's office was utilitarian. Metal desk, filing cabinets that required two-factor authentication to open, walls covered with maps and commendations. She sat across from Mr. Carter, who was reviewing his tablet with an expression of mixed satisfaction and concern. "The team has been debriefed and understands the parameters," Morrison said. "They won't talk. And if they do, they won't. I've served with these people. They understand operational security, and more importantly, they understand loyalty. Someone saved their lives. They'll protect that person's anonymity with the same intensity they'd protect any team member." Carter set down his tablet. This was a significant risk. Activating a retired asset for active operations, especially one whose previous work created as many enemies as Ghost did. It was also necessary. You saw the intelligence. Without intervention, Holloway's team was going to be destroyed. We would have lost 9 highly trained operators plus critical intelligence from the prisoner. And now? Now Ghost goes back to retirement, permanently this time. No more activations, no more just one last mission. They've earned their quiet life. Have they? Carter's tone was sharp. Or have they become an addiction? Someone who saves missions that should fail, who enables us to take risks we shouldn't take because we know they're there as a safety net? Morrison leaned back in her chair. Are you suggesting we shouldn't have sent them? I'm suggesting that having someone of that capability available creates moral hazard. It makes commanders less careful because they believe Ghost can bail them out. It makes planners more aggressive because they think the impossible is just difficult. That's a fair concern. Which is why this was the last activation. Ghost is done. The legend dies tonight. Does it? Or does it just go dormant until the next crisis? Morrison didn't answer immediately. She knew Carter was right. Having that level of capability available was intoxicating. It was tempting to activate it again and again, to lean on someone who could solve problems that should be unsolvable. But it was also unfair. Ghost had given years of service, had paid a price that most people couldn't comprehend. They deserved peace. It's done, she said firmly. I'm marking Ghost's file as permanently inactive. Even I won't be able to reactivate them. And if another crisis emerges, then we'll handle it with the resources we have. The way we're supposed to. Carter studied her face, then nodded slowly. I'll trust your judgment, but I'm filing a recommendation that we develop our own capabilities rather than depending on singular exceptional individuals. We need depth, not just peak talent. Agreed. I'll support that recommendation. Carter stood to leave, then paused. Did you ever learn their real name? Ghost's actual identity? No, and I don't want to. Some things are better kept as mysteries. After Carter left, Morrison sat alone in her office. She pulled up Ghost's file, or rather, the heavily redacted document that served as their file. Most of it was blacked out, classified so deeply that even she couldn't access it. But she could see the mission count: 247 operations, 0 failures, estimated lives saved, 800 plus. And at the bottom, added just today, final status, retired with honor. No further activations authorized. She approved the document, locked the file, and felt something she hadn't expected. Grief. Not for Ghost, who was alive and safe, but for the necessity that had created them in the first place. For a world where someone had to become a legend just to keep other people alive. She thought about Holloway's team, sleeping peacefully tonight because someone invisible had protected them. She thought about the families who'd get to see their soldiers again, who'd never know how close they'd come to loss. Sometimes the most important victories were the ones no one knew about. She turned off her computer, locked her office, and walked out into the night. Snow was falling gently, turning the base into something almost peaceful. In the distance, she could hear someone singing a Christmas carol, off-key but enthusiastic. Morrison smiled despite herself. This was what they fought for. The ordinary moments, the small joys, the safety to be slightly ridiculous without fear. Ghost had protected that, had protected it for years. Now it was someone else's turn to stand watch while Ghost finally rested. 2 months later, Harrison was running a training exercise for a new group of operators, teaching them terrain navigation, threat assessment, tactical decision-making, the usual curriculum, refined by experience and delivered with the confidence of someone who'd survived situations that should have killed him. One of the students was struggling, moving too slowly, second-guessing decisions. Harrison watched him fumble through a simulated engagement, getting killed by opposing force 3 times in a row. Mitchell, Harrison called out. You're thinking too much. Trust your training. Trying, Sergeant. Just not fast enough. Harrison almost said it. Try to keep up. The words were right there, automatic, the kind of casual mockery that he'd used 100 times before. But he caught himself. Remembered Christmas Eve. Remembered being so certain of someone's limitations, so confident in his assessment, so utterly wrong. Instead, he walked over to Mitchell, spoke quietly. Speed isn't the same as effectiveness. I'd rather you move deliberately and make good decisions than rush and get everyone killed. Take your time. Build your confidence. Mitchell looked surprised by the tone. Yes, Sergeant. Later, after the exercise concluded, Webb found Harrison reviewing the day's performance notes. Heard you went easy on Mitchell, Webb said. Went realistic on Mitchell. Kid's got potential. He just needs to believe it. Character growth looks good on you. Harrison smiled slightly. Learned from the best. Ghost? Yeah, and from my own mistakes. Turns out being confident isn't the same as being right. Webb sat down, pulled out a bottle of water. They'd both been running the training all day, and exhaustion was settling in. Good exhaustion, though, productive. You ever think about that night? Webb asked. Every day. Not obsessively, but yeah. It changed something. Made me realize that the most dangerous people aren't always the ones who advertise it. Think we'll ever see her again? No. And I think that's how it should be. She did her part. Now it's our turn. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the next training group gear up for evening exercises. Young operators, eager, confident, untested, just like they'd all been once. We need to be better instructors, Harrison said suddenly. Need to teach them that underestimating people is a fatal mistake. That the quiet ones, the ones who don't need to prove anything, those are often the ones who'll save your life. Agreed. How do we teach that? By modeling it. By being the kind of leaders who recognize talent regardless of where it comes from or what it looks like. Webb stood, stretched. You know, Christmas Eve sucked, but it also gave us something valuable. What's that? Perspective. Understanding that we don't know everything, that there are levels of capability we haven't even imagined, and that humility isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Harrison thought about that, then nodded. Yeah, that sounds right. They walked together toward the barracks, the day winding down, another training cycle complete. Behind them, Mitchell was practicing his room-clearing technique, moving slowly but deliberately, building the foundation that would eventually become instinctive. Harrison watched for a moment, then called out, "Good work, Mitchell. Keep that up." The young operator looked surprised, then pleased. Positive reinforcement was rare in special operations training, but it was also effective when used correctly. "Thank you, Sergeant." As they walked away, Webb said quietly, "She'd be proud of you, of how you've grown." Maybe. Or maybe she'd just say, "I finally figured out what should have been obvious." Either way, it's progress. That night, Harrison sat in his quarters, writing in a journal he'd started keeping after Christmas Eve. It wasn't official, wasn't meant for anyone else to read, just his private processing of experiences that had changed him. He wrote, "Learn today that the words we use matter. Try to keep up used to be a challenge, a way to push people or mock those I thought were weak. Now it means something different. Now, it's a reminder that I should try to keep up with higher standards, with better judgment, with the kind of excellence that doesn't need to announce itself." The legend taught me that, even though I never knew their name, never saw their face clearly, never understood who they really were, they taught me through action, through competence, through saving my life when I dismissed them as irrelevant. That's a debt I can only repay by being better, by seeing people clearly, by recognizing that capability comes in many forms, and the most powerful is often the quietest. He closed the journal, turned off the light, and lay in darkness, listening to the sounds of the base settling into night. Somewhere, far away, a person who used to be Ghost was probably living an ordinary life, working an ordinary job, walking an ordinary dog. Maybe they thought about that Christmas Eve mission sometimes, or maybe they'd filed it away with all the others, just another night, just another group of lives saved. Harrison hoped they were happy, hoped they'd found peace after all those years of violence. And he promised himself that if he ever met someone quiet, someone unassuming, someone who didn't need to prove themselves, he'd pay attention. Because the legend had taught him that those were often the people who mattered most. The ones you'd never see coming. The ones who'd save you anyway. Outside, snow began to fall again, gentle and steady, covering the base in white. Another Christmas was approaching, nearly a full year since that night in the mountains. Harrison smiled in the darkness. Next Christmas, he'd volunteer for duty, let the younger operators have time off. He'd stand watch, keep people safe, pay forward what had been given to him. That's how it worked, after all. You didn't